The central unifying concept of media education is that of representation, symbolic sign systems that must be decoded. Without this principle, no media education is possible. From it, all else flows. Hi, and welcome to the third lecture on media literacy. Today we're going to talk about representation. By literal definition, representation means to stand in for something, like a small sample may represent an entire population, or a country's ambassador may represent a country's image. Symbolic representation is one of the most important components of media literacy education. To understand it, let's first understand it in terms of language. If you remember, in the first lecture, we mentioned that all language is media that we use every day. Any language, even sign language, makes use of symbols to convey a certain meaning from the sender to the receiver. When we say the word apple, for example, to another person, their thoughts immediately turn to the red or green fruit that we're mentioning, although there's nothing fruity about the word apple itself, which is comprised of letters A-P-P-L-E. So the meaning of the juicy red fruit that grows on trees is represented through the word apple, although we don't think about it each time we use the word. The theory of representation, however, goes much deeper than that, and there are three basic approaches to how we understand representation. The reflective approach states that representation merely means a depiction of a certain reality that is out there. Then the success of representation may only be determined by how good it is at portraying that reality accurately. Since a depiction is almost always not 100% of the real thing, some theorists have gone so far as to say that representation means a distortion or deviation from the reality. The intentional approach sees representation as merely an expression of the author's intent and seeks to understand what the speaker, writer, or painter wants to say. So the success of representation in this model is the ability to accurately transfer the intent of author from the sender to the receiver. Beyond these two approaches, a third approach, called the constructionist approach, believes that representation creates new meanings in and through the very act of representation itself. Stuart Hall, a cultural theorist of the 90s who had advanced the theory of representation, rejected the traditional linear approach in favor of a more interactive circular approach towards representation. In this approach, representation is not really concerned with the accuracy of how certain reality is being depicted, but rather it is more centered towards creating new realities and new meanings through the very act of representation. Obviously, there's something being represented, there's always something there to start with, but the represented image or sound itself is a whole new meaningful existence. And therefore, how something is represented becomes pivotal to understanding what it means. This approach tends to cater more towards our understanding of media literacy because, as we discussed in the fourth key concept of media literacy, media messages are constructed using a creative language with its own rules. Thanks again for watching. The next lecture will be on politics in media and how we, as responsible media analysts, can deal with it.